To ponder the UFO as a metaphysical technology, an embodiment of spirit and potentially the human soul, then consider Platonic Surrealism as a new and powerful ontological framework. This is Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I'm your host, James Falk. Thanks for joining us. It's become evident in recent years that there are those amongst the human population who report living in a world much richer and more dynamic than the one experienced by so many of the rest of us. There's no clear map of identifying character. There often is neurodivergence, where autism and, among other conditions, seems to potentially predict some kind of profound and transcendent connectivity. We've interviewed both Kai Dickens and Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell about this phenomenon, as well as our guest today, Kevin Cann. He is the co-author of Chapter 3 from Professor Jeff Kripal's most recent book, How to Think Impossibly, and someone who those most learned in these subject areas are keenly interested in. He's been on our show before, and at that time shared his amazing journey through trauma and autism to discover a world richer and more complex than most of us imagine possible. This fall, Kevin will be joining Kripal at the Esalen Institute to teach a class, The Soul as a UFO, Understanding and Embracing Transcendence. We'll preview that subject matter, dive a little deeper in Cann's philosophy, what he calls Platonic Surrealism, then explore the purpose and power of spiritual endeavors. I'm thrilled to have him back on the show. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, James. What a warm and well stated intro there. Thank you.
It's my earnest feeling. I appreciate you and enjoy our conversations, and think that you have some of the most profound insights I've encountered in this space. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Um, uh, there are a lot of folks who follow what you say, and some very learned people are involved in, I don't know if you'd call it a kind of a salon kind of thing, but I know that you send out missives at times, and there are some very interesting and bright folks on your email list who engage with you in these conversations. And some of the things that come up in those conversations are absolutely mind-blowing. So it is a real privilege to have you on the show, and thank you for being here. I'd like to sort of start with the class that you and Jeffrey are going to be teaching this fall. It's in December. And as I mentioned, it's called The Soul as a UFO, Understanding and Embracing Transcendence. Can you give us sort of your pitch for what you will be talking about during that class and what you hope to impart to attendees?
Indeed. So first off, I did not come up with the title for the class, but it's a little clickbaity sounding, but classes often are, right?
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to attract attention.
Right. But what's cool is that there are strong elements of what I say are veridical truth to the title. One of the big concepts that comes later, way down the road in Platonic Surrealism, is the concept of hyper objects. I believe there was a fellow named Marsden, if I'm getting my quote right, who
James
initially
Madden.
came. Madden, that's the one. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep
No
me
worries.
honest. I'm a little sleep deprived today, as we discussed.
Yeah, that's no worries. I forget names all the time. So
Okay, so just give credit where credit is due, right?
yeah.
And so a hyperobject is an object that is, let's call it multidimensional, multifaceted, many things at once. You might even compare it to what Ezekiel saw in the Bible. You know, many faces all at once, a vehicle, not a vehicle, like an angel, like people, not people, all these things at once. And so I really like that as a reference. People go, oh, yeah, I kind of get what you're saying. So hyperobjects are actually far more common in my observation, and other people are starting to discuss the concept. There's a lot of explanatory power there.
Mhm.
For example, if someone sees a UFO, well, let's say there's two people, like there's the old Jacques story that's just awesome, where a guy sees a UFO, it's like 10 feet away, right in their face. His brother goes, oh, yeah, that bus drove up and pulled up. What do you mean, bus? That's a UFO. And there's other stories where somebody might see their dead grandma. I mean, now there's people who take that in a negative direction and go, oh, our minds are being controlled by a hostile force, bring out the nukes, you know. And that Cold War mentality's got to go away because it's going to destroy us all. But, and other people go, oh, it's the unconscious mind cannot grapple, can't figure out how to present it to you. So it's just all gobbledygook garbage, you know, don't take it seriously. Those are explanations, but they're not good explanations. Now, we should always check out all available explanations and kick them around and see what makes sense, right? But with a hyperobject, a quote, UFO can be all those things at once, including a soul. And so I can mention Whitley Strieber, give credit where credit's due again. Mm-hmm. It was his wife, Ann Strieber, who said, you know, after reading tens of thousands of letters about UFOs and abductions, she says, I think this has something to do with the land of the dead or the dead. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have the quote exact, but it's close. And she was right. She was right. These hyperobjects are part of the land of the dead. And I would know because I died and I stayed there for a while. And I came back. Apparently, I came back before my brain decayed too much. It might have been 5 minutes. I don't know what it was. It wasn't just a near-death experience. It was death. This was back in like 2012. I believe I talked about it on our first interview.
Yeah.
So, you know, these things I talk about, most of them I've seen, in a manner of speaking. Now you could go, oh, you're tripping, dude, you know, that sort of thing. But when thousands of people see things, you know, regular, you know, police officers, you know, combat pilots, doctors, lawyers, farmers, when all of us see these things, you know, increasingly, these things can't just be swept under the table because they're inconvenient for our modern scientific paradigm.
Yeah.
I'm all for the modern scientific paradigm. I love cold beer and I like being vaccinated against COVID. I think it's really awesome. Science is really awesome. But, you know, in an unbounded reality, science has to crap out at some point. So we need to come up with different systems and techniques and to keep our minds open, but not keep them so open like Carl Sagan says that our brains dribble out. So there's a real balancing act there, and that's what Platonic Surrealism is all about.
Yeah.
It's about the balancing act of keeping 2 feet on the ground and your head isn't even in the sky because your eyes can see the sky, but your head is still firmly attached. It's a very great of the woo-woo systems, and I wouldn't call it woo-woo. It's more grounded than most.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's designed, well, remembered. I remembered it. It's a structural framework that helps people deal with anomalous experiences and still without going crazy down the bunny holes like so many do. That was one of his first charters, Platonic Surrealism. But it makes a great life management system in general.
It's in one of the descriptions I saw online about your class, I think you refer to Platonic Surrealism as the new synthesis.
Yes.
Maybe that was on your website, and I wanted to read something here it was on your website about Platonic Surrealism. There's a couple of quotes, and I was hoping we could use those as leaping off points for the conversation.
Perfect.
Let's see here. Okay, the first one is Platonic Surrealism is a framework that is part of the, quote, new synthesis of analytical idealism, the interface theory of perception, imaginal semiotics, the divided brain, and the making of the Western world, and corrections to Neoplatonism, neo-Gnosticism, and other historical frameworks. That's a lot right there. But I want to go ahead and finish this one quote, and then we can start talking about it. The main focus of Platonic Surrealism is the healing of the individual, the group, and the larger life through simple liberation techniques, which I want to get into. The typical folks drawn to PS are students of metaphysics, spirituality, ufology, and the Fortean, as our modern world has failed, and we need to tell new and better stories if we want to live in peace and prosperity. Platonic Surrealism is not a cult, not a religion, not even a spiritual system per se. None of that nonsense. It has no agenda other than to make helpful information available, and all of Platonic Surrealism is public domain. It originally came about due to a collaboration between Kevin Cann and Jeff Kripal during the book How to Think Impossibly About Souls, UFOs, Time, Belief, and Everything Else. Wow. Okay. Um, I want to go through that. We mentioned that it's a new synthesis, and I think that you kind of list what some of the elements of that might be with Neoplatonism, neo-Gnosticism, and other historical frameworks. Uh, what do you think? I mean, what's my question here? There's so many directions I want to go. I mean, analytical idealism comes from Bernardo Kastrup. Is that right? Can we say that? Okay.
Yeah, give credit where credit's due. The man's brilliant.
He is absolutely, and I love his books, and I've had him on the show at one point. And then you say it's analytical idealism, and then the interface theory of perception. What does that mean?
Donald Hoffman.
Okay,
You must, yeah.
yeah, sorry, it's basically the idea that what we see and interact with is evolutionarily not necessarily what reality is, and it's more of an operating system, and therefore we can never really know what reality is because we're only seeing what our brains show us, and that is only what we need to survive and pass on genetics, correct?
Yes, except for, of course, someone of a mystical bent will say, no, you really can get gnosis, and that's Gnosticism as well. It just takes some work. You have to redesign your interface to see beneath the standard Windows desktop sort of thing, you know. That normally is what we focus on.
And that's what the liberation techniques, which I
Correct.
really want to talk about. But before we get there, and then you talk about imaginal semiotics. I think I know what you mean, but can you give us a little bit of a nut graph on that?
Right. Um, that's really a nod to Jeff Kripal, all his work about the imaginal, how when we have extraordinary experience, instead of words, we get symbols, we get visual images and non not generally non-auditory, non-language based signaling.
Hmm.
And that's because the part of our brain that can pick that stuff up is more the right brain hemisphere. Ian McGilchrist gets a big nod as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
The man's also freaking brilliant.
yeah. Well, I have to say, man, like what you're listing here is exactly everything I've been pursuing on this show for like the past year and a half. I mean, all of these folks, I haven't had them all on the show because some of these guys are really big names and I'm a very small podcast. But I'd like to have Donald Hoffman, for instance, on
Brilliant. He's brilliant.
and he is brilliant. And I think that the divided brain, Ian McGilchrist stuff is really fascinating and interesting and says a lot about human identity and the way that it's almost as if different minds can coexist in the same physical being, you know? And I think that that's
Well,
really
Platonic Surrealism talks about the five brains of man. It's
okay.
a big concept. Oh,
Okay.
might as well list them off.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
please.
yeah, left brain hemisphere, the big picture. Now, rest assured, all the neurologists, neuroanatomists, neurophysiologists will go, "Oh, you're talking that discredited theory from 20 years ago, the right, drawing the right side of the brain stuff." And no, I'm not. I'm not doing that. But there are parts generally localized in one side or the other more than the other that do big picture processing or do what I call telescopic processing. For example, the social persona is the brain uh, center of consciousness, center of self that most of us are most familiar with. but it's got the microscopic thing. It can really focus down on the tiniest details, and we need that, right? We needed to evolve that. The
Yeah.
trouble is that you get severe tunnel vision if that's what you run your life with. You need to also bring in the largely ignored, more holistic, artistic, creative functionality, the feeling self as well. So they're different hemispheres, but they're barely connected in some way. There's the corpus callosum, there's the midbrain, all this stuff. But in many ways, we could talk about split brain patients and all this, but in many ways, they're like different brains. So those are two of the brains,
Mhm.
and really, spirituality, mysticism, and whatnot are largely ways to just get the two brain hemispheres to collaborate better. Uh, and as a matter of fact, in psychedelic studies, they found out that psychedelics don't typically increase brain activity as a whole. What they tend to do is to shut down pieces of it so that the parts of us that we can't normally hear very well are more easy to interact with.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the corpus callosum typically blocks the right brain hemisphere. So a lot of mystical practice, spiritual practice, and what we call in Platonic Surrealism is wholeness, uh, is all about using simple, non-woo-woo, non-bullshit, really not even spiritual, just basic techniques to become more whole between your two brain hemispheres so you can leverage the best of everything you have in your toolkit. Those are two of the brains.
Yeah.
We talk about the plasma symbiosis layer.
Yes.
So there's been a
Which
lot of that.
yeah,
Go
I
ahead, sir.
read some of your emails about that, and that ties into um, Robert Temple, right? His work with intelligent plasma, his book, The New Kind of Heaven, or A New Kind of Heaven, which is a fantastic read. I recommend it to anybody and everybody I can. Basically arguing that plasma, demonstrates complicated behavior and seems to interact, seems to have all of the hallmarks of what a kind of a living, intelligent creature would demonstrate, but it's just in a way and in a format that we don't understand, and potentially that is the what would you call it? Uh, the framework or the body of some of the other kinds of intelligences that we've encountered throughout human history. And
Absolutely.
I find that really compelling,
I
as you
find
can
it really
obviously.
compelling too. Actually, I'm kind of a sleeper guy. I was working in the man's world. The man, the guy who's you got to have a starch white shirt and your suit coat, and you've got to show up 5 minutes early and stay 10 minutes late and pay the man. I paid the
Mhm.
man for my whole life until I retired about a year ago. So I kept all this to myself, and I waited till I retired. I built up a little retirement nest egg and got my house paid off and my family straightened away, or actually they straightened me away. Uh, Family
Mhm.
does that. Family, yeah. There was a spiritual teacher that said there is nothing more spiritual than living in a family,
Yeah,
and that
absolutely.
yeah, there was a group of wise sages in India called the rishis, and some of them said, yeah, of the hundred of there was an age of 100 rishis of supposed enlightened men, and 99 of them were married. So it's important. It's important not to be hung up on your own ego and to be part of a larger social structure. I mean, that's really what
Humility.
spirituality is, right? That's
Yeah,
what it is.
yeah.
So so that's
Three, right? The plasma.
three.
Yeah.
Okay. And then 20% of the neurons in the body are actually in the gut, called the enteric nervous system, the intestines, the stomach. 20%. Can you
That is a
20%?
lot.
That's a lot of neurons. And when I was like 12 years old, a lot of Platonic Surrealism came to me. And I've been sitting on this for over 50 years. Yeah, this isn't recent stuff. It's been developing over time, but a good half of it was from when I was 12 years old. So Jung talks about the shadow, and that's merely the part of the personality that tends to get ignored, and it often gets toxic and nasty, and people are afraid of their shadow. And the shadow's in the unconscious mind, so people are afraid of their unconscious mind, and everybody cramps it down and tries to deny it. It includes the worst of them and some of the best of them, but really it includes things that have been ignored. And what I noticed when I was 12 is all my more antisocial, aggressive, kind of toxic, dark sort of thoughts and feelings. And I had them because I was, abused heavily as a child. And it seemed focused in my stomach. Well, there's an interesting correlation here with the phenomenon. I've noticed from interacting with experiencers, I'm an experiencer, whatever that's supposed to mean these days. Um, they tend to carry the phenomena in their stomach, in their shadow, is where they tend to carry it.
Mhm.
And people always wonder, well, how do the UFOs and the phenomena, how do they know what we're going to do before we do it? Well, they live inside of us, so that's why they know what we're going to do. Uh, we're in a symbiotic relationship with plasma, by the way, and that's where um, just a note on that.
Yeah, I want
I
to come back to
was,
that though.
yeah, yeah. I uh, I was a member of the Gopi Krishna Kundalini Research Foundation for 10 years when I was younger, and it was our charter to understand what Kundalini was and to research it, and if possible, to explain it with science. So, and I'll come back to the other brains, don't worry.
Yeah.
Um, and my mentor said, well, I know you've got all these ideas you want to share, but you got to read everything that Gopi Krishna ever said. And there was like a big wealth of stuff he'd said and written about that was not public knowledge. And you got to read all that and you got to be able to quote from it. And then if you still think you got something to say after reading all that, well, then I'll listen to you. So I read everything, including some stuff from Kashmiri Shaivism, you know, really exotic stuff. And I immediately came to one conclusion that got me kicked out of the organization on the spot. I said, I've noticed, you see, I had just been diagnosed with autism,
Hmm.
high functioning autism, Asperger's, as they used to call it. I wish they'd bring that back. It was a good diagnosis. But anyway, I noticed that Gopi Krishna had Asperger's. And of course, don't tell your fanatic mentor that his holy man who had died, you know, in the last 10 years, don't tell him that he had a neurodivergent condition. He didn't care for that. But from what I know, is true. I mean, I read all about his personal life. He got
Yeah.
sensory overload. He got all the same sort of things. All I experienced all the same things he did, all of them.
Hmm.
And that state got me classified as being in the autistic spectrum. So it was obvious he was too.
Yeah.
And you know, I say that a lot of the famous religious figures of the past were on the artistic spectrum.
Yeah.
They uh, they had more of an open mind to the larger life, as we call it in Platonic Surrealism, and not just stuck on normal human interactions. Uh,
Yeah.
most people are plugged into the human processing network, so to speak, like the kind of bored collective of being a human being, and they automatically know what to do and say in most situations. They might not always get it right, but they tend to. It's kind of baked in.
Yeah.
But autistic people don't have that. That part of the brain is used for other things, like apparently starting religions, spiritual systems, and philosophical systems and frameworks called Platonic Surrealism.
Yeah.
So
So
just
is that an evolved thing, do you think? Or is that, I mean, how do you a lot of people want to say that we're evolving toward this kind of ascendant moment, right? Where human beings are going to, whether shift density or whatever language you want to use, that a lot of people do, that we are, moving toward something, and that perhaps people who are neurodivergent and have these capabilities to connect might be on the leading edge of that. Can be a dangerous idea because then it isolates people who are autistic and, can in some ways dehumanize. But what are your thoughts on the whole idea of humans, evolving spiritually towards something, or is it just another kind of shift in the long, biological career of human beings?
good question. Um, I'm not going to come out strongly on either side, believe it or not, on this one.
Okay.
The idiot answer would be to go, oh yeah, yeah, Homo superior is evolving, and they're the autistic people, and they're going to bring us to the promised land. No, I'm not going to say that. I don't even believe that. But nature uses what's available that brings value.
Mhm.
And I would say that the human race has itself in a very bad position right now. And out of the box thinking, that's not just crazy, but actually provides different perspective and possibly better answers. That's something we could really use. Uh, I would say that the stuff that I tap into, other people tap into, is the same stuff as creative muses, strokes of insight that scientists get. You know, the benzene ring was a vision. Uh, Einstein's view of the universe apparently was a vision that hit him. So I say let's use what's available to us and do something good with it. I want to just say one more thing about Kundalini. I first wrote about Kundalini. Well, no, I didn't write about Kundalini. My mentor said you may not talk about Kundalini because Gopi Krishna got it right, and anything else anyone has to say is wrong. He was a Kundalini dogmatic. So you know how it goes. A boy cannot become a man until his father dies, is the saying. So he died a few years ago. So now I'm starting to write about Kundalini. He had his turn. Now it's my turn. But just to loop this back in, so we can get back to our topic, I conflate Kundalini on some level with symbiotic plasma.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wrote a big paper on it. I don't think anyone ever in the history of the world has written a paper quite like it. Uh, One thing that plasma does is it tends to make Coulomb crystals. And I believe that the structures at the base of the spine and our pelvic girdle are kind of a giant plasma accumulator, kind of like a Reichian plasma accumulator.
Yeah.
And this substance is kind of the body of what we call Kundalini. And since I know how to awaken Kundalini, there's techniques to do it. Really, most people could do it, but it's just not the sort of thing you should typically do. I know
Yeah.
people talk about it. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's like playing with an atomic bomb. I don't really recommend it.
Yeah.
So, but just to draw the correlation there between plasma symbiosis and Kundalini. And last, I'd like to mention that back in 2013, I wrote a white paper for the Invisible College of Jacques Vallée about plasma life forms and how the relationship with ufology. I wrote a paper, and I think it sparked various people talking about this back 10 years ago, but of course, I've never wanted to take credit for anything. So people don't even know that I was doing this back before most people ever thought of it.
Yeah.
And I also had a book published. Uh, Brad Steiger published my plasma hypothesis back in, what was it, 2015 or something. So that's been out there, and I never even say the name of the book, and I won't here either. But there was a book where I came out and discussed all this way back. So what's cutting edge and new is actually, I'd say, thousands of years old, and it's been known the whole time, but
Yeah.
that's just how it
Is
goes.
that is that what the soul is?
The soul is a very interesting topic. So, I would say that there's three or four different views of the soul, right?
Hmm.
One is that there ain't no such thing, that we're just stupid, pointless meat sacks, and why don't we just, why bother to live at all?
Yeah.
That's what science tends to say.
Nihilism.
Yeah. Ah, then typically the monotheistic religions want to make the soul eternal, one thing, forever unchanging, and they want to imbue it with evil. They all want to talk about how it's evil and needs to be saved, which means you got to obey them and put money in their offering plates. I don't follow that line of thought. It's never shown any credibility to me in my entire life. Um, the ancient Greeks thought that there were souls, but they decayed over time. The Egyptians might have too, but the Greeks had manes, and the soul kind of decayed over time in their model. Platonic Surrealism. Okay, then of course Buddhism. Now Buddhism is the most cray. I really respect Buddhism, by the way, but you have to have 12 master's degrees to even begin to understand Buddhism properly, I swear. Um, it's most Buddhism is what's that? Oh, I forgot the word. It means no soul. So Buddhism doesn't have souls per se, but Buddhism teaches a system called dependent origination. Um, it's kind of a pre-existing spark of a fire that's been burning, and it leaps from place to place. And you know what? That's actually not a bad theory. It it says that we are not separate from nature. You see, I don't know if Buddhists think about it that way, but that's what dependent origination means, that we bubble up from nature itself and we're part of it. Now, what bubbles up can cause a lot of suffering. You know, if you don't know how to deal with this soul, see, Buddhism doesn't say a lot of, if you read a lot of the better texts, they don't necessarily say there isn't a soul, but it says that there is no unchanging eternal soul, that souls such as they exist at all would be eternally changing. That's a very wise point of view. Now, Platonic Surrealism says something markedly different, but very respectful of Buddhism and all those other things too, by the way. All those other things are like a piece of the elephant. One,
Yeah.
the blind man or the seer, they see. One sees a trunk, one sees, a tail, etc.
Yeah.
All these religions and systems saw a piece of it, but they never got what was actually happening. Platonic Surrealism says, yeah, we know what really happens. So, uh, yeah, everything that I talk about is what I call remembered or experienced. And then generally in the last 10 years, well, not 10 years, but I verify with what other systems say. And I see if I just pulled something out of my ass or if this actually makes any sense. You got to do verification, right? Research.
Yeah.
So, as part of my death experience, my death experience was the strangest thing because I had three separate windows into my death experience at different times before it happened. So, time is just a whole different subject where I don't know anybody among my friends that believes in linear time is all there is.
Yeah.
Time, time is just every which way. Um, so, I mean, but for purposes of telling a good narrative story, it typically seems to be, past the future, that sort of thing. Though, of course, in quantum mechanics, there's retrocausality or possibly retrocausality. So anyway, when I was on the when I was dead, I in one of the three occurrences of experiencing being dead, I was in a place that a friend of mine later on said, "Oh, you were in the Bardo." See, I wasn't a Buddhist. He was a Buddhist monk. So he goes, "Oh, you were in the Bardo." So I was aware of four powerful beings sitting at a table, and they were discussing shop, talking shop, that they had been collaborating on this project for thousands of years. And then they accumulated their data, and they decided it was time to break up the working group. Well, that working group was my soul, and they dispersed. So if it's like Buddhism says, the soul, if you want to believe in one from a Buddhist standpoint, it's ever changing. So in Platonic Surrealism, souls are temporary working groups, collaborations between monads. Monads are the big thing to know about in Platonic, one of the big things to know about in Platonic Surrealism. So monads are like some people, you could compare them to like cabala or something, sparks of the divine, something like that. Or
What some people would
um,
typically think of as a soul, right? I mean, like if people were to just throw out a definition, often that whole spark of God kind of thing is what an individual monad is. But people aren't limited to an individual monad as their embodying spirit, right? That's not how you see it. Is that correct?
well, I guess we could do the distinction that's always been a little murky in metaphysics and spirituality and religion, the difference between spirit and soul.
Of course, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. So you could call monads spirit if you wanted to, that have souls. I mean, say you're a reincarnation guy, right? Well, the soul in this life is fairly different from a soul in that life. Now, what happens immediately here when you realize that everything's happening all at the same time? So you can't have reincarnation. It takes linear time. But that's not really how reality seems to work. So then you've got what I call, what Platonic Serism calls co-incarnation, meaning you're living all these lives simultaneously, and the spirit is learning from all these concurrent existences, and that spirit uh, we call monads. Uh, not the
Which,
same, not the same as Leibniz, who was co-creator of calculus with Newton. See, this stuff, like Newton was one of the most brilliant scientists ever to live, kind of the father of physics, right? But he was an alchemist,
yeah,
and
that was his fundamental
his
passion, I think.
yeah, that was his real passion. That was his day job, right? And Leibniz was also worked on it, and he came up with apparently a philosophical metaphysical system dealing with monads. Now, I've never read any Leibniz, just a teeny bit. He actually seemed more like a shaman, and which is fine with me because shamanism tends to blow past all the nonsense uh, human created stuff. It's more primal. So I've always appreciated shamanism. Actually, Plotinus, the great neo-platonist, he also spoke about monads, and I've not read about his monads. You may think I read all these great men and take their stuff and mix it up into something different, but it's exactly the opposite. I see this stuff, I always saw this stuff, and then when I look for corroboration, and especially since I met Jeffrey Kripal back 3 years ago, he'd say, "Oh yeah, you've been reading Plotinus," and I go, "Who?" "Oh, you've been reading Nietzsche." "Oh, really? I guess I've heard of him." "No, I haven't been reading any of these old dead dudes." See, that's what I always said to him. I don't read these old dead dudes. I experienced this stuff out of the box, just the way that I am from birth. This is just how it is. But there has been a great learning process here that I'm part of a tradition of people similar to me. through the ages, and there's great value to see what the giants that came before said and did.
Yeah.
So in recent years, due to Jeff's influence, I've been studying a fair bit.
Yeah. At least it can help you reach other people who may be familiar with those systems, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
yeah,
I On the subject of soul, I want to get this very clear here.
please.
Um, it's one of the hottest topics. Soul and free will. Those are the two hottest topics. And UFOs and Roswell. I don't even get me started on Roswell. And I'm not going to talk about that silly thing. Um, so Platonic Surrealism helps you make a shift. Instead of thinking you're just an isolated body that suffers in a world that is beyond your control, which is also true, by the way. None of us control this world. And then religion took it to a point of, oh, you've got a soul. And then so they get you worrying about the soul, kind of a consolation prize for a crappy life that if you obey them perfectly, you'll get to go to their heaven, which I would call that my hell. Most of these, everybody's heaven is somebody else's hell.
Absolutely.
Everybody's angel is someone else's demon. There is no one size fits all. But so there's another level above soul that is actually much healthier to consider, and that's awareness. In Platonic Surrealism, you've got the infinite, unbound pool, so to speak, of potentiality, which is like the grand infinite palette, the closest thing to God you're going to run into, which is simply all the potential things that could ever be, all the different properties, i.e., like Platonic ideals. Every possible up, down, wet, dry, every apparent duality, every monopolar thing, anything you can describe about anything that could ever exist or will never exist, that's all in potentiality. But potentiality doesn't do anything. You see, it's not some angry sky daddy, it doesn't do that. It's nearly completely passive from what I've noticed. And yes, if you do the exercises of Platonic Surrealism, especially if you're in the artistic spectrum, you might experience these things I'm talking about clearly, personally. And then you can make crazy sounding statements about the infinite, ultimate nature of God and reality and go on people's podcasts. So, one of the things that pops up pretty quick is awareness. Awareness is simply the ability to be aware, to comprehend that properties exist and kind of an innate desire to organize them. It's the first non-passive thing that exists outside of space and time before it all. And Platonic Surrealism says, just like analytical idealism, there's only one awareness. Just like there's only one potentiality, there's only one awareness. And that awareness is kind of the mind of God, but God doesn't do anything but be the potential. And the way it all works, okay, so by the way, I know we haven't described the fifth brain yet, but we'll get there. We have to go through this to understand the fifth brain.
I love it, man. This is brilliant. Let's keep going.
Oh, thank you. So, um, in the velvety blackness of fullness, which is pre-space, pre-time potentiality, where I live, where we all live. Actually, we all live there right now. All of us. There's a basic instability, kind of an itch, kind of a tiny hunger to exist, because potentiality doesn't have to exist, right? It's the potential to exist. And out of that itch, out of that instability, awareness arises because you can't exist if you're not aware of existing. It's the most fundamental thing about existence is being aware. I think, therefore I am. It's the one thing we can all agree on. Since we're aware, obviously we exist or something exists, right? So awareness is the most fundamental thing after potentiality. So the next layer in the cosmogony of Platonic Surrealism is called primordial consciousness. Now, if awareness were perfectly aware of all the properties in potentiality, right? If there was one being that was aware of everything, that's that's probably what a lot of people would say God is, right?
Hmm.
Awareness that is aware of all of its own properties. But here's the catch. Primordial consciousness is inherently super unstable. And I'm gonna give a ridiculous number for it, but I've got a reason I use it. Primordial consciousness can only last for 10 to the minus 10 seconds. Now, and then it kind of explodes. It's the breaking of the spheres, like in Kabbalah. And other systems talk about the same sort of thing. So the basic concept is for the unbound infinite to know itself, it has to limit itself. And to limit itself, it has to functionally damage itself.
Yeah.
It has to turn off bits of itself. It has to word salad itself. It has to, and then you get the next layer, which is called fractured consciousness. And that's what we live in typically, fractured consciousness. So you've got all these bits of consciousness that are trying to reform into primordial consciousness. They want to be whole, right? It's just in many ways like organic Kabbalah. And one of the basic units of consciousness is a monad. That it's I used to call them, I still do, a one-bit entity. I exist or I don't exist. Okay, I do exist. That's the one bit of differentiation from absolute infinite potential. That's where
Hmm.
it has to start. I exist. So monads are just vast numbers of them form as a result of this, let's call it explosion, or it's like a crystallization from the instability of trying to be everything and to hold it in place. So these are basic tenets. You can read about it on the website. There's a definitions tab that goes over all this. If anyone wants to, there's like 10,000 documents on Platonic Surrealism on that website, but the one that's most important is the tab that says definitions that talks about this.
Can I ask,
So, yes, yes,
real,
sir. Yeah,
well, where
please.
does narrative fit into this, or like story? It seems like that there's a hint that whether it's to entertain itself or to edify itself, there's these monads have need for creating a kind of a journey. Is that right? And
Correct.
is that what our lives are? I mean, how do you see
Movies.
that? Movies, yeah, okay.
Yeah. In Platonic Surrealism, we're actually right now, and this, I don't even know if we have time to talk about this, but we're living in the past, you see. Everything already crystallized out. The vast pattern of all possible realities all crystallize out in an instant, and monads all have a part in telling these stories from their perspective. When I teach a class at Esalen, I'll show, by the way, when I was dead, I saw my own monad. Now that was weird. And by the way, it's not necessarily one for one. You can have vast seas of monads that form beautiful partnerships with each other. Just like they can send tendrils down into space and time and make souls. No, souls can last a trillion years sometimes. But here's the lesson of Platonic Surrealism. Don't get hooked on your body. Don't get hooked on your soul. You are awareness itself. And all the practices of Platonic Surrealism, that's number one.
Mhm.
I am unbound awareness. The awareness that lives in all bodies, in all forms, in all times, in all worlds. And once you get a sniff of that, it's very transcendent.
Yeah.
And your mind is altered, your body's altered,
It
your
sounds in some
emotional
ways like
nature.
Jiddu Krishnamurti. Are you familiar with
Yes, some, yes.
yeah, he talks a lot about the awareness aspect and how that's the real transcendent state, and we're distracted often by I mean, our thoughts basically serve to kind of keep us submerged in, this reality, and it's about kind of breaking free from all of those reflexive behaviors and limiting habits of mind. Um, but that's so antithetical to what we're brought up in. We're basically taught to be thinking, feeling humans, but that is what limits our connectivity. So it's like you
Absolutely.
have to find that balance, I guess.
Right. So now all that, and there's so many things to talk about. I mean, I got more I can talk about in a 2.5 day class at Esalen. I won't cover it
Yeah,
all.
sure.
But the fifth brain is what
Hmm.
some people, and I'll use a metaphor here from Gnosticism. The fifth brain is the pleroma. The field, and what I call the pleroma, I don't do the archon thing, and I don't do the. Well, we can talk about the demiurge. In fact, that's I could talk about the demiurge for a full hour.
Is
Very
that
fascinating.
it is a real thing?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
it's
interesting.
plasma. The field of plasma is the demiurge. It's 99.9% of the universe. No wonder it thinks it's God. See? That should be mind
It
blowing to you.
is.
Yeah.
That's my
And
laughter. That's mind blown.
I've met the demiurge. I had quite a few dealings with the demiurge. And it's not evil. It is what we want it to be. If we want to tell a story of evil and this and that, it'll play along. It'll play along with anything. It gets boring to have near eternity. And any good story, oh yeah. I mean, we go to the movies and we go to shoot 'em ups and like hell, sometimes a child's even hurt or some awful thing happens. But it's a movie.
Mhm.
You see, one of the core tenets of Platonic Surrealism is there is no privileged reality. There is no core physical world, and we're not in a simulation because we're brains in a vat and some aliens are controlling us and we're in a matrix. No, it's actually I didn't even know about this till recently, but as taught by Plotinus, this is basically an emanationist model that everything emanates out from potentiality and awareness. And in Platonic Surrealism is a thing we call the gentleman's agreement. You see, I really want to explain this. Um, Sometimes Platonic Surrealism gets compared to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And then that interpretation gets rocks thrown at it because it's not parsimonious. Oh, if I make a decision, then a different decision, then a whole universe is created. Well, what a waste of matter and energy to make a whole different universe to branch off. That's what many worlds seems to say. Well, that's not what Platonic Surrealism says. In fact, Platonic Surrealism is the single most parsimonious hypothesis, theory, or framework you could possibly have. And here's why. If there's only one awareness, only one sea of potentiality, only one being functionally pretending to be the many beings, including us, if it wants to make a universe, does it have to create matter and energy and all this stuff? Well, physicists say yes. And in Platonic Surrealism, we call physics movie physics. It's the physics of this particular movie. But all the one life would have to do is have a gentleman's agreement. This is all a movie, like a simulation. but it's not a simulation. It's a story in the mind of the one. And the gentleman's agreement is, oh, we're going to believe this is real. We're going to believe it's hard, matter, energy, with laws of physics and all that. And we'll just make it so. Okay, it is so. You can call that a simulation if you want, but it's really not.
Mhm.
And you know how much matter energy that takes to make that universe? Functionally, I can't say for certain, but close to none. It is the most parsimonious model. All of physics is just crappy compared to that. It takes all these unique particles and parameters and this and that and this and that and this and that. But if everything's just one thought in the field of potentiality and awareness that we concur, we're going to follow the rules of that thought, then it doesn't take matter and energy. So it's a very important concept.
Yeah.
And that's where Platonic Surrealism really branches out from like Gnosticism. That see, Gnosticism typically is dualistic, meaning matter is like evil or at best neutral, but generally evil. And the pleroma, the mind of God, the higher thoughts and angels and archons and such, they're good, but matter is evil, and we're trapped here. That's what Kabbalah kind of says too. Uh, that you have to heal the world with tikkun, I think is how they say it, or to escape the evil simulation, as Narcissism calls it. But none of that's true. We're our own jailer, you know?
Yeah.
Now, if awareness gets itself into a really engrossing movie, might it have difficulty? It's the thing like, can God make a rock so heavy you can't pick it up? And the answer, of course, is yes, because I can't pick up heavy rocks, and I'm composed of the same stuff as God. So God can create rocks that God can't pick up.
Because we're all
So
God.
yeah,
Yeah.
all there's just one being, and we're all part of it, like cells in the body of this being. That doesn't boss us around, doesn't judge us, doesn't create heavens and hells. Humans are the ones that create heavens and hells. Uh,
It's
before the
interesting
advent,
though.
go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you mentioned that the God can't be a unity because it's inherently unstable and that it can only last together for 10 to the minus 10 seconds. Um, so there is going to never be a coming back and existing within God in wholeness. That's kind of um, it's almost kind of a bait and switch. I mean, we're never going to get there. Is that not the purpose of what we're doing as spiritual creatures? So is there a purpose for us? I guess.
Well, to answer that, I have to evoke my favorite series of Star Trek Voyager. People
Huh?
pick on Star Trek Voyager, they say it was crappy. No, 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 no. So in Star Trek Voyager, the the crew of the Starship Voyager was trapped in the Delta Quadrant, and it would take them like hundreds of years to get back to the Federation space, and it was dangerous, and they suffered and whatnot. Well, rather than let this destroy them, I mean, they set course to go back and they did every trick. They looked for wormholes and new technologies to get back faster. But they had a saying. They would they would say, and this makes me cry. Isn't this so dumb? Star Trek makes me cry.
I love
Um,
it.
yeah. They would say, you know, if I had to be trapped here with anyone in the Delta Quadrant, I'd rather be trapped with all of you. And it isn't so much where you are that matters, it's the journey that matters. That's what matters. And it really cheered them up. And it's true. The journey is what matters. So here's the thing about Platonic Surrealism that people often don't like. So no, absolutely. Um, and I always mangle the guy's name, and I only remember half of it. Um, Teilhard de
Chardin.
Chardin, yes.
Yes.
He
The
talks about the
noosphere.
omega point and everything is coming back together. And he was right, everything is coming back together. But the problem is, once it's together, it's inherently unstable and it can only last that way for 10 to the negative 10 seconds.
And then the same thing happens
So,
again.
yes. Now, people think that's awful, but no. Now, first off, let me tell you, it takes like 1 trillion years to the 1 trillion to the 1 trillion to the 1 trillion power to come back together. It the amount of time it takes to come back together to have all realities, all multiverses, all dimensions, all everything to all come back together. It's a purely staggering amount of time. And trust me, after all that hard work, you are ready for a break. I have some memories about this. I know it sounds crazy. I have some memories about this. So, one, the amount of time involved is ridiculous. So don't sweat it. Number two, it's the journey that matters. But yes, number three, it's very simple actually. In the field of unbound potential with awareness, you've only got the one jigsaw puzzle because it encompasses everything that could be. And when you put the jigsaw puzzle together, well, you're done. And now you don't have anything to do
Mhm.
because it would then be static. You'd be finished. You'd be as close to an unbound infinite being as you can imagine with nothing to do. And that is a bad feeling. That's a bad feeling. So it's not stable. So after all those unbounded trillions of years, let's call it the divine, because it is divine for those 10 to the negative 10 seconds. It's God. God exists for 10 to the minus 10 seconds. God as in a way that humans can understand it generally. I mean, potentiality is really God that gives birth to awareness, which some people like mystic Christians would say, oh, that's the logos. Okay, so these things have been out there before, but God only exists in that form for 10 to the negative 10 seconds. The jigsaw puzzle's in his hand, so to speak, and then he goes like that, 10 to the minus 10 seconds later. Now, talking about time and that exact number is kind of ridiculous.
I was
I
just going to
know
ask that because, like, if you're saying that everything happens at once, how does that figure into? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Um, Everything happens at once, and thus, in a sense, primordial consciousness is permanent. Because, for example, if you fall into a black hole, you never quite get there. Time slows until you never really get there, and you live in this eternal now. And so, no, primordial consciousness is eternal and permanent, and yet it's also at the same time only lasts 10 to the negative 10 and breaks into chunks again. It's both. It's like Jeff Kripal says, it's both and. So that's what it comes down to, actually, in terms of Jeff Kripal has that great thing of both and,
Mhm.
you know. We are mere movie characters here. We have to follow the script. And the movie's already played, actually. It's already played. We're playing out the script. But we are awareness. So we are one of the producers of the script. Well, we are the only producer of the script. But the monads, they collaborate. It's usually monads that are big producers of a particular movie. The substrate is already exploded out there to work with, but then there's colorings made by the monads on the structure, kind of like paint on the canvas there. And so people go, oh, well, I don't have free will if I'm living in the past. Well, in the past, you don't have free will, but in the future, as a co-creator, you've got all sorts of input. But you've only got input because there's all these monads, there's all these stories trying to be told in this one creative effort. So you've got an input, but that doesn't mean the world runs the way you want it to. So learning limitation and how to deal with it is one of the main things that Platonic Surrealism is good at. It teaches you to be grounded in the real physical world, real because of the gentleman's agreement, Respect science because those are the habits and the rules of the movie production. They're good to know since we're here at this level also. But it gives you the freedom of being unbound awareness. You feel that you are after you do the practices. At least some people do. I do.
Yeah.
Uh, you can get monadic consciousness. I get that frequently. I have an interesting life. So, on the one hand, we're prisoners of our own creations, but we made the creations. We're just regular human beings, but part of us is transcendent.
Yeah.
And it's all balanced, it's all reasonable, it all helps. It doesn't make you crazy. You don't want to go drink poison Kool-Aid and chase after UFOs or anything. It just it heals you from negative bunny holes.
Yeah. Well, we did want to ask you earlier, you had mentioned that oftentimes the alien is within you, like it sort of imbibes in your body or whatever. How do what we're encountering as the alien, is it all one thing, or is it like any other zoological kind of, entity, some or both? I mean, could it be like some people think it's both and you got maybe interplanetary travelers, but then also you've got things coming from other kinds of reality. But then you mentioned that it's within us. Is it a consciousness phenomenon and a kind of a corruption in the plasma, a visitor within the plasma? And how does that? Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but that one in particular I thought was important.
All right. Well, what I've personally noticed over my life of meeting some of these life forms, um, I've only really met 4 distinct life forms. Now, these life forms are movie life forms, right? They're not
Hmm.
transcendent life forms. So, of course, they're probably part of a, well, they are, they're part of a hyper object, which is up here, maintaining all of these different movies and worlds and beings. But um, humans generate dream substance, which is actually what fairy folk in the land of the dead need to live. People think that it's parasitic. It's not. It's like if an animal dies in the woods, then its body nutrients are used for life around it. Doesn't mean that anything killed it. It could have died of old age. It could have died for any number of reasons. So, yeah, there are fairy folk. Absolutely. I've run into 2. My wife ran into some, actually. She had a kind of a near death experience, and one came and visited us. That's a story for another day. So there are fairy folk. Some of the UFO phenomena are just fairy folk. They live in the land of the dead. They uh, they live on the husks of the temporary souls when awareness is done with them. You know, some people live for 1 trillion years in the afterlife in some world of the imaginal. But once they get sick of it, once awareness gets sick of that, it lets it go and the components fade away. And they're recycled through the ecosystem. The fairies live on this stuff. That's one ufological thing in the dream of our world that is a factor.
Yeah.
Um, and dream substance does at its lowest level have a strong link to plasma. So, and then of course, yeah, you've got just orbs, plasma orbs. Uh, they originally came, as Robert Temple said, from the Kordylewski clouds,
Yeah,
L4 and
yeah.
L5, and little offspring have been living here ever since. I've noticed that they got kind of separated from the Kordylewski clouds due to the oxygen atmosphere, various changes here on Earth. So they got kind of separated from their mama daddy up there in the little Grange points. So those plasma orbs, they're not necessarily part of the land of the dead. They're just plasma. That's something you might run into. Um, I've also run into fungal entities. Now, this is a really fun one. From what I've observed, something like 80% of our universe that is inhabited is by transcendent telepathic fungus. They don't need spaceships. They don't build structures. They're a giant intelligence. I think Terence McKenna probably ran into them. Some people might even think they're machine elves, but I've ran into this fungus. And an interesting correlation. By the way, I'm working with Joshua Cutchin. He's
Hmm.
becoming a really good close friend of mine.
He's going to be on the show next week.
Yeah. Well, he's going to be at the class, with Jeff and I.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I remember
Yeah.
hearing.
So, um, in his book Brimstone to Sea, he talks about how oftentimes during anomalous incidents, people smell hydrogen sulfide, right? Well, hydrogen sulfide is a decay product of fungal and other matter of a similar nature. When the fungoids come here, they open these little portals in the mycelial network. I can go over the physics of that sometime. But they travel here without ships, and you'll smell their home atmosphere. Uh, this is real and not real, all this stuff. It's this is movie physics here, but they open these little portals, and yeah, you'll smell their home atmosphere, which has a lot of hydrogen sulfide in it. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Everybody's so obsessed with ships, but the predominant life form in our universe is fungus, and it doesn't use ships, and it can teleport through space and time at will through the mycelial network of space time. There's one built right into it. These little tubes, kind of like the nanotubes, not nanotubes, microtubules
Mhm.
in the Hammerhoff model of
Or
quantum.
or
Yeah,
jar
yeah. Or
consciousness.
jar.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the universe has those little tubules built right into it as part of the graininess of space time. Any half competent mystic can just see it. And they travel through that and they come here. They don't need ships. Humans want ships, by the way.
We understand
Until,
it. Yeah,
yeah,
that's what we understand.
until people started making movies about it, etc., we never saw ships. We saw angels, we saw fairies, we saw this, we saw that. So the real aliens, they are coming here, but they don't need no stinking ships. All this ship mania is just like mental illness. Sorry,
Yeah.
it's really crazy. Now, I know that sounds very provocative. The uh, the plasma life forms can materialize physical objects. Like you've heard about these spheres that people find. Yeah, they can. They would have a reason to manifest spheres sometimes. Built out of Coulomb crystals, dusty plasmas. They can accumulate metals. That's why you get the slag. Like sometimes, like Jacques Vallée found samples of. Yeah, these plasmas can make physical objects, and they can even make a ship if they want to. You notice that none of these ships ever have any engine components that anyone can identify. That's because they're just popped into existence by the plasmas and the fungals, and they serve a purpose. It's like 3D printing. It's like
Mhm.
3D printing thought, kind of. So good luck reverse engineering that, I gotta say. Yeah. So those are some of the real physical things that I've encountered since, yeah, most of my life, on and off.
Well, that's our time, but that is such a fantastic conversation, and I have to say, I think I'm becoming a Platonic Surrealist. I need to study more of the website and read more. Eventually, a book would be helpful. I
Well,
don't know
I'm
if that's
collaborating. I'm collaborating with another famous author on that right now.
good. Good, man. This is profound stuff, and I think that for me, it brings in a lot of the elements that I've been researching, the conversations I've had, and it like makes sense in a way that most other kinds of approaches don't. And even though it's made up of elements of other things from the past and even contemporaneous, it's its own coherent system. And I think that you're to be congratulated on making all this make a little bit more sense. Uh,
I'm a character in a movie,
yeah,
enjoying the movie. I am enjoying the movie.
yeah.
Are you enjoying the movie?
I am enjoying the movie. I am
Great.
enjoying the movie, and for a long time I didn't. And as I've gotten older, I figured out ways to kind of my big trick right now is to sort of embody that awareness. I mentioned Krishnamurti
Perfect.
because that's someone I've been reading a lot of, trying to figure out how to get out of the world that I construct for myself and kind of, take part in whatever that broader principle is. And it's helped a lot, and I hope to get better at it. Um,
I can teach you the practices sometime. We never had a chance to even talk about them, but I can personally teach you the practices if you want.
I'd love that, and I'd love to have more conversations. Maybe in a month or two or a couple months.
Sure.
Maybe after your class, we'll have you back on. We could talk about those practices and
Well, the
um,
class is in December.
yeah. So whenever, but
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
have you back, whether before or
Okay.
after. It's up to you.
Yeah, whatever works for you. I'm
Yeah.
available.
I uh, I think that you've got a profound handle on a lot of things that most people don't. So I appreciate you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your appreciation.
All right, man.